of addiction in my framework, that she was a remarkable woman, retired at the time, and was able to dedicate so much loving energy to the people around her that were really wanting to break the cycle of their addiction.
Wow. Has she written something, or has she done something to get to the world what she must know from all of her, all of the efforts she's made to help people? I mean, that's great information that she could share.
It's really fascinating you're saying that, Roberta, because I feel like that's mine to do, to help bring her teaching into the world. She made her transition actually on July 4th, 1998, so 20 years ago. It was very interesting in her approach because she didn't like to speak. She didn't want to write. She wanted to sit down one-on-one with someone and just be present in this powerful and amazing way. And I remember toward the end of her life, her saying to me, "You are the one that can take this message out because you love to write." So it was as if she passed that baton to me. And we know, of course, that there's no death, right? So her spirit lives on.
Right.
And it's been an honor to take that baton and to say, I'm now going to bring this, if you will, out to the world. I think the fundamentals of my book, Conscious Recovery, come through her.
Which is fascinating. Now, so everyone can understand how this all fits together, it's probable that this woman has become part of TJ's guidance because he's doing the work that she was here to do, and he's carrying it on. So she's almost certainly guiding you. I'm delighted about that. So basically, she's writing her books now. They just happen to have your name on them.
That's right.
All right, so you began to get better, and at some point you then found unity, right? And that had a big impact on your life.
Yes, late 80s, 1988, I walked into my first Unity church. I was in Dallas, and it was another one of those moments that I could feel that it was groundbreaking and life-changing. It was as if I had found home. You know, it reminded me of the first time I had Indian food. I was like, oh, I found food. It was like I found the spiritual food. It was that conversation, a group of people in conversations that just I wasn't in my day-to-day life. So it was definitely a coming home and at the beginning of my spiritual path.
I think that's wonderful. I had the same experience with Unity in just around shortly after the year 2000. The problem is, though, and I thought it was going to be like this will be the spiritual way of the future, but it's turning itself into a religion now. It's obsessed with the Fillmores, who would never have wanted that. And any time we start emphasizing the teachings of somebody who founded a movement, we're no longer growing in that movement. So sadly, I can't be with Unity anymore. But it's great. It launched me too, in a sense, into the next stage of my life. So I recommend Unity. 20 years ago, it was wonderful. But how did you get involved then in Eastern religions? Because you really that's where you really began to grow spiritually.
Yes, it was really wonderful. Well, Mary Helen was really my introduction to Eastern thought. She was a devotee of Sai Baba's in India, and she had gone to India pretty much on a yearly pilgrimage after her retirement. And I went on one of those trips with her. We went through Thailand. We spent a few days in Thailand, and it was there that I fell in love with Buddhism because of the gentleness of the Thai people. So that really opened me up. So it was simultaneously I was, at Unity and studying this sort of metaphysical Christian thought, and then I was looking at Buddhism, and I had met Amachi, the hugging saint from southern India. I went to stay at her ashram, and I believe it was in 92. So that really opened me up to recognizing that if you distill down these different spiritual teachings, so much of them are teaching at its core that love is what we are. So I really love that I've been able to take these different traditions and integrate them into my own journey.
Yeah, it's wonderful. In fact, it's kind of necessary for us to do that. And everyone sort of, we're all like different instruments almost, or different keys. We're each vibrating slightly differently. So to find the place that resonates with you, just as TJ found the kind of teachings that resonates with him, that's very important because it won't be the same for all of us. And for some people, indeed, it will be the teachings of Jesus when we actually apply them, which is something we haven't been doing, but now begin to do. For some, it's going to be people who talk a different language and are following a different source of spiritual growth. But I think Buddhism is powerful. If you don't think of it as a religion and instead think of it as another great teacher who came to teach us the truth. So that helped you to grow spiritually and did that then help you begin to feel whole, that you were being healed from the problems you had in your childhood?
Oh, absolutely. I think that, it's been quite a journey for me over the years, and all of those different teachings all were pointing back to this fundamental knowing that I knew inherently, which was that we're already whole and perfect. We already have this spiritual wholeness. And I had spent so many years seeking something up there. And, a lot of religions just continue that, right? I love that you talked about unity in the Fillmores. It's fascinating that Charles and Myrtle Fillmore did not want it to be a religion, and certainly not want the two of them to be idolized.
Oh, right. That's sad.
Yeah, and that's what happens at one level of consciousness. We're looking for a savior. And I realized, that's not what this is about. And if you look at the fundamental teachings of Jesus, as you so beautifully bring into the world, or Buddha, or a lot of these enlightened masters, they're all saying we already have this enlightenment within us. It's about returning to that place.
That's right. This is a process of going home. And that's the whole point. So as you were doing this, you decided to become a minister, and you started to study for the ministry?
Yes. Yeah. In 2004, I would say around that time, I had this inner knowing that ministry was mine to do. At that point, I had served on the board at Unity. I'd been the board president for 2 years. I was very close with our minister. And every Sunday morning, I would have that inner knowing, that vibration that was really resonating within me. And I honestly, Roberta, said no to it for at least a year, because I didn't understand, my ego mind didn't understand how I could transition from the life I was living into that. And so that began quite a remarkable, talk about some opportunities to unlearn. My whole world, once I said yes to ministry, my whole world started to crumble. And what I recognize is that when, as my spiritual self said yes to a deeper calling, everything in the world that I'd created in this egoic way began to crumble. So I knew that I was on my right path.
Oh, my goodness. Watching your life fall apart is a sign that you're on the right path. Is something not everybody would say, but I think we understand what you're saying. What you're saying is that you were burning away the dross and finding the gold inside you. And that I should just add, you were apparently fairly successful in your material life. But that turned out, of course, not to be satisfying either. The true path for all of us is a spiritual path. And I think that is probably the greatest lesson I'm learning in doing this work and in interviewing a lot of people who have found that path. Not a single person I have interviewed in 5 years has ever said, when I made my first million, that was when I started to really get it. No, it's only when you've given away that first million and the last one that you start to feel whole. And it's hard for people here and now to believe that, but I'm telling you it's true. Tell us, what is different about conscious recovery? What is your system? In a nutshell.
Well, thank you so much, Roberta. I feel like the first 30 minutes of this show really helped set the stage for how I came to my approach. About 12 or 13 years ago, I began working in the addiction treatment field, and based on my own experience, because at that point I had already been myself in recovery for 20 years, and I'd had all these different experiences, inner and outer experiences, that led me to the knowing that there was this place of spiritual wholeness. So when I began my work, I quickly realized, as we talked about in the beginning of the show, that so many of the treatment modalities were deeply entrenched in this Western medical model. What's wrong with you, and how do I help you heal it or fix it? And I came in and thought, what if I were to come in with a completely different viewpoint, knowing that the observer has a profound effect? What if I were to look at every single person that I was sitting with, whether that's in a group or individually, and look through to the spiritual wholeness? What might that create? That's the fundamental difference about conscious recovery. I'm looking at it through the lens of wholeness. And because of that, I have seen powerful, powerful demonstrations of what can happen simply by that very subtle yet huge shift in perspective.
But still, what were you actually doing that was different with these people? Were you getting them to talk more? Were you trying to understand their brokenness? Were you teaching them mantras? What were the steps these people took?
Well, in the beginning, I started with that because I wanted to open up the conversation with a knowing that I'm looking at it through the lens of wholeness. And so in my book, Conscious Recovery, I have 3 different sections of the book. The first one is the roots of addiction. And in my experience, what I have come to understand is the 3 deep root causes of addiction through this spiritual lens are unresolved trauma, spiritual disconnection, and toxic shame. And the reason that I bring that into the conversation now is this toxic shame piece is so huge. So many of us are walking around feeling broken. And when I work with people who are coming out of an addiction, there's a very strong sense that there's something fundamentally wrong with me. That's what they're saying, right?
Yes.
I'm broken. I'm not lovable. I'm not worthy. And what happens is a lot of times then the treatment team, if you will, or the people who are wanting to help them heal come in and actually co-sign that. Yes, you are broken. How can I help fix you? Right now, it's not. I don't think that that's necessarily conscious, but that's what ends up happening.
I should just point out too that everybody that is born in this world lives many lives. This is just one of them, and we bring into this lifetime baggage from not just our past lives but also our future lives. And there are for us to require that everybody be just the same, it's not possible, in other words, to be attracted to people of your own gender. It's not possible to feel that you're in the wrong body. None of those things, all of those, when we communicate to our children that whoever they are confident they are is not okay, that is probably the worst child abuse there is. Every child deserves to feel validated, whole, healthy, and loved. And so much of our attempt to shape our children to live in this world, which is, broken itself, so much of it involves weakening our children and shaming our children rather than teaching them to be strong in who they are. So that is such wisdom, TJ. That's wonderful.
Thank you, Roberta. And that's really what you're speaking to is the fundamental perspective here. We do come into this world that teaches us that there's something wrong with us. And some of those messages are subtle, and some of those are not subtle at all. But many of us get taught things that there's something fundamentally wrong with us, our sexual orientation, our gender, certain things about us. You need to act this way because, and
yes.
That creates a damaged sense of self, right? So when we come into the world and get taught these messages that there's something wrong with us, that's a traumatic experience. Don Miguel Ruiz in his book, The Four Agreements, calls it the domestication of the human. I love that because we do come into this world. Yes, we do bring things in from other lives, and we come in as these spiritual beings that inherently know what joy is. A small child, yes. A very small child. So simply being human on this planet is a traumatic experience for many of us. And then we do develop this disconnected self. We connect from who and what we are, and then we develop a sense of brokenness, which is shame.
Yeah, and I should point out too, one thing I neglected was race. There is a serious addiction problem in the African American community, and from the perspective of what we're talking about now, that's not surprising. It's very hard for a little African American child, whole and beautiful, not to begin to feel damaged by a culture that is trying not to notice that they're black rather than accept the beauty of who they are as people. And no wonder there's a lot of addiction in that community. And we're going to need to deal with that. This is an area, of course, people know, which is my special interest, and is becoming much more so. We can heal all our racial problems, every one of them. There is no difference between the races, but we have a lot of work to do, and this is another way we need to do it. Little children should grow up feeling they're the most important person who ever lived.
Absolutely. It reminds me, I just watched a beautiful documentary about Fred Rogers, about Mr. Rogers. I watched the second time yesterday with my husband, and it was so powerful because here's a man that came into this world absolutely dedicated. His ministry, if you will, was being present with each young child and recognizing that there is a place and a space for people to